In the winter of 1917, somewhere along the frozen Eastern Front, a small infantry unit received an order that none of them expected to survive. The previous lines had collapsed. Ammunition was scarce. Their task was simple: advance and hold, no matter the cost. The Eastern Front in 1917 was a long wound stretching from the Baltic to the Black Sea. The war had dragged on for years, tearing at armies already weakened by hunger, exhaustion, and political turmoil. Russia was approaching revolution. Command structures were faltering. Supplies often failed to arrive. Soldiers marched in dug trenches in snow and mud, unsure whether the greater enemy was across the battlefield or behind them in their own collapsing empire. Amid this vast confusion, one infantry unit was positioned near a battered stretch of front line. Many of the men were young reservists. Others were veterans worn thin by years of fighting. They came from villages and towns scattered across the empire, speaking different dialects but sharing the same coarse rations and thin blankets. Their commanders worked from outdated maps. Communication lines were unreliable. Orders traveled slowly, often arriving long after circumstances had changed. In early 1917, rumors began to move along the trenches. A major offensive was expected. There would be one last effort to stabilize the front, or at least to prevent the enemy from breaking through. The men understood what that meant. Preparation intensified. Positions were reinforced with rotting timbers. Machine gun crews checked their weapons again and again. Medical stations stocked bandages but not nearly enough morphine. This unit occupied one of the most exposed salients along the line. It jutted forward toward the enemy, offering little cover and no safe retreat. Officers studied the ground and realized that, tactically, the position made little sense. Yet headquarters demanded that it be defended. The reasoning was never fully explained to the men who would have to carry out the order. Letters home were written during rare quiet moments. Some spoke of snow drifting into dugouts. Others mentioned the distant sound of artillery that never seemed to stop. Many soldiers no longer believed the war could be won. But they still followed orders, because the alternative was court-martial or worse. Discipline, though fraying, was enforced with harsh severity. When the final orders arrived, they were delivered in clipped, formal language. The unit was to advance slightly from its position and create a forward strong point. The wording suggested routine movements. The soldiers knew better. Advancing meant leaving what little protection they had. It meant becoming visible targets on a landscape already scarred by shells. No one said it aloud, but many understood the truth. This was not a maneuver meant to succeed. It was a gesture meant to delay the enemy, to buy time for other formations to reorganize. The men prepared quietly. They cleaned rifles. They shared the last of their bread. And they waited for the hour when whistles would blow. The attack began before dawn, when the horizon was only a faint gray line. The ground was frozen hard, and boots scraped against the ice with every step. The unit climbed from its trenches and spread out as ordered, moving in staggered lines toward the enemy positions. There was little shouting. The air held only the sound of wind and the dull thud of distant guns. Within minutes, rifle fire erupted from the other side. The advancing soldiers had no real cover. They dropped to the ground, crawled a few meters, then rose again. Machine gun bursts swept across the open field. Some men fell silently. Others cried out and were dragged aside by comrades who already knew they would never return to the rear. The officers tried to maintain formation. Hand signals replaced shouted commands. They knew their task was not to break through but to occupy the enemy's attention. Every meter gained was paid for in blood. Ammunition pouches emptied quickly. Grenades were thrown with practiced movements, their explosions briefly blotting out the steady rhythm of incoming fire. As the day wore on, the weather shifted. A light snow began to fall, dusting bodies and equipment with a thin white layer. It softened the scene but changed nothing. The enemy brought up artillery, and shells began to land among the advancing troops. The unit formed makeshift firing positions in shallow craters, returning fire whenever a target appeared. The ground shook. The air smelled of smoke and cold earth. Several key decisions shaped the rest of the day. The commanding officer, aware that retreat meant disobedience, chose to push forward once more. He believed that if they could reach a small line of trees ahead, they might hold for a few hours. Runners carried the order along the scattered line. Some never arrived. Others delivered the message to men already wounded or barely conscious. A portion of the unit managed to reach the trees. They set up machine guns and began to fire in short, controlled bursts. This slowed the enemy advance but also revealed their exact position. Counterfire intensified. Splinters flew from shattered trunks. Medical supplies dwindled. The few surviving stretcher-bearers moved constantly, stepping over fallen soldiers whose names would soon be lost in official reports. Night fell, but the pressure did not ease. The men held their position because there was nowhere else to go. Rations had run out. Ammunition was nearly gone. Communication with the rear had collapsed. Still, they remained at their posts, fulfilling the order that had sent them forward in the first place. By the second day, the unit was little more than a fragment of what it had been. The original strength had dwindled to clusters of exhausted survivors, scattered among shattered trees and shallow pits. Many could barely recognize each other beneath layers of grime and dried blood. Voices were hoarse. Movements were slow. Every action required effort. The enemy recognized that resistance was weakening. Their infantry advanced cautiously at first, then with growing confidence. Artillery continued to pound the position, forcing the remaining defenders to hug the ground. The unit's machine guns, once the backbone of their defense, had overheated or been destroyed. Rifle fire grew sporadic. Some men continued to fight even after being wounded, propped against the remains of tree stumps. At one point, the commander gathered the few officers who remained. They discussed whether surrender might save the lives of the men still breathing. But the orders had been explicit. Hold the position. Do not withdraw. Do not yield. The commander, bound by duty and the rigid expectations of wartime discipline, chose to continue the defense. He said little. There was nothing to say that would change the situation. The final assault began shortly afterward. Waves of enemy soldiers advanced, supported by covering fire. The defenders answered with what ammunition they had left. Smoke filled the air, mixing with the falling snow. The ground turned dark where blood seeped through the ice. Individual acts of bravery went unseen, unrecorded, swallowed by the chaos of battle. One by one, the remaining positions fell silent. A gunner slumped over his weapon. A messenger collapsed midway between two posts, the order still in his hand. The commander was last seen directing fire from a shallow trench before disappearing in a burst of shrapnel. By late afternoon, organized resistance had ceased. The enemy secured the area and moved on, leaving behind the remnants of the unit that had been sent to delay them. News of the event traveled only briefly through official channels. Reports emphasized the temporary success of the delaying action. Numbers were listed. Positions were marked. But there were no names. No detailed accounts. The unit had fulfilled its purpose, at the cost of nearly every life. Then it vanished from attention as new crises emerged along the ever-shifting front. For the families waiting at home, silence eventually replaced hope. Letters stopped arriving. Notifications came late, incomplete, or never at all. The winter of 1917 passed. The empire fractured. Records were lost or destroyed. And the soldiers who had marched toward the trees on that gray morning became little more than a footnote in a war crowded with tragedies. The battlefield fell quiet. The echoes stopped. Only the wind remained. It moved slowly across the frozen ground. Snow began to settle. It covered bodies. It covered rifles. It covered the last traces of struggle. No one rebuilt the position. No one marked the place. The line shifted. Maps changed. The war moved somewhere else. Another village. Another road. Another patch of earth to defend. The unit no longer existed. It had been removed from the lists. Numbers were adjusted. Reports were filed. Short, simple sentences. Losses sustained. Position delayed. Objective achieved. But the names faded. Faces blurred. Memories grew thin. Paper survived longer than men. Back home, winter ended. Spring arrived. Fields turned green again. Work continued. People waited for letters that never came. Some received a small notice. Others heard rumors. Many heard nothing at all. Years passed. Empires collapsed. Borders changed. Governments disappeared. Old uniforms became relics. Old battles became paragraphs in textbooks. The ground where the unit had died turned quiet. Grass returned. Birds nested in broken branches. Rain washed the soil clean. Only fragments remained. A rusted buckle. A twisted piece of metal. Bones with no names attached. Travelers sometimes passed nearby. They did not stop. There was nothing to see. No monument. No plaque. No carved stone. Just open land. Wind. Silence. Archives still hold traces. Lists of casualties. Illegible signatures. Smudged ink. Reports written in a formal hand. They describe actions. They describe results. They do not describe the men. The soldiers are missing from their own story. They exist only as totals. Strength before engagement. Strength after engagement. Difference noted. Their advance bought time. That is how it was written. Nothing more. Nothing less. The world continued forward. New wars began. New uniforms. New weapons. New orders. But the field stayed the same. Quiet. Unremarkable. Forgotten. Families aged. Photographs faded. Frames gathered dust. Stories were told less often. Details slipped away. Voices stopped mentioning the war. In the end, the unit became a shadow. Not a legend. Not a symbol. Just a group of men who followed an order. Advance. Hold. Do not retreat. They obeyed. They died. The front moved on. Nothing marks the place where they fell. Nothing records the last words spoken. Nothing preserves the final moment. Only silence remains. Deep. Unbroken. Uncertain. This is what forgetting looks like. Not sudden. Not dramatic. Just absence. A slow erasing. A steady fading. until the story exists only as a faint line in a forgotten file. And even that will one day disappear. The wind continues across the old Eastern Front. Snow falls. Grass grows. Time moves. And the men of the unit remain where they fell. Unseen. Unmarked. Unremembered. Thank you for watching. New historical stories are published regularly.